Okay, so this is a 14-year-old boy that has pain in his left upper leg, but hasn't had any recent injuries, and on exam has pain with palpation, but no erythema is noted on the skin. An x-ray shows multiple concentric parallel layers of new bone. Treatment is started with actinomycin D. What is the cause of this patient's condition? So I'll give you a minute to answer, and then you can come back. Okay, so this is going to be B, Ewing sarcoma, and so let's look a little bit more at that. And so Ewing sarcoma is a type of cancer that typically occurs in boys less than 15. So in this case, that fit the question because the kid was 14, and it was also a boy, so it fit the demographic. And another thing to know is that it typically occurs in the diaphysis of the bone. And so just a quick recap of bones. So they're typically distributed into three parts. So the top part is the epiphysis. And so the middle part between the epiphysis and diaphysis is the metaphysis. And so this is actually where Ewing sarcoma occurs, in the diaphysis. And so another thing associated with Ewing sarcoma is the T1122 translocation. So they could throw that in to try to clue you in that this is indeed Ewing sarcoma. And the biggest thing that clues you in is onion skin. So typically when you hear about Ewing sarcoma, you'll hear this buzzword about onion skin, but it's pretty rare for step one to actually talk about onion skinning. They'll usually try to describe it instead because they know that you know all the buzzwords. So they'll describe it as multiple concentric parallel layers of new bone. So obviously that's a little bit more convoluted than onion skinning, but that's just something you have to associate whenever you hear this. And if you think about it, that actually does relate and describe how an onion would appear on a bone, because there would be multiple concentric parallel layers. And then finally, the other clue is that the child was treated with actinomycin D. So actinomycin D is a chemotherapy agent that intercalates into DNA. So you'll hear that a lot. That's just a fancy word saying that this drug will insert itself into the DNA and then prevent it from replicating. So especially for cancer cells, you don't want transcription and translation to occur, and so this will disrupt those processes and prevent the cancer from growing. So let's look at the other answers and why they're wrong. So osteochondroma is also another cancer that occurs in boys or men less than 25. And so the typical association with that is bony exostosis with chondroid cap. So this is just a fancy word for bone spur. And so this can be excluded because the clue is the onion skinning in the question. This describes something completely different, and the demographic would be older for someone with this. So main thing is looking for the demographic and then looking for the keyword. And so the next one is giant cell tumor. So this one, the demographic doesn't really fit because it typically occurs in 20 to 40-year-olds. And then the keyword here is soap bubble, which is just multinucleated giant cells. And then another clue is that it typically occurs in the epiphyseal region. And remember that Ewing sarcoma occurs in the diaphysis. So osteoporosis is another condition where essentially you have defective osteoclasts. Now remember, osteoblasts create and osteoclasts destroy the bone, right? And so you can remember that as osteoclast. So the C can be crush, so they crush bone. So since you have the defective osteoclast, you have osteoclasts that can't crush the bone anymore. And so instead, you just have a lot of bone being produced. And so this actually creates very thick, dense bone. Now you would logically think that denser bone would be stronger, but in reality, the stronger it becomes, the more brittle it becomes because it doesn't have that elasticity. It is strong, but the thing is, you need some elasticity to prevent it from completely breaking. upon impact. And then the final thing is, remember that cell lines are actually created in bone marrow. So if you have too much bone there, they can actually crowd out the cell lines and cause pancytopenia, which is just the destruction of all lines, and cause extramedullary hematopoiesis, which means that if you can't produce your cell lines in bone marrow, you can end up creating them in other places, such as your spleen or your liver, like how you did when you were developing as an embryo. And then finally, osteosarcoma is another type of cancer that occurs in the long bones. You get similar type of pain like you do in Ewing sarcoma with bone pain, but this one occurs in the metaphysis. And remember, once again, Ewing sarcoma occurs in the diaphysis. So this actually has a bimodal distribution. So it typically occurs in people that are 10 to 20 years old, and then people that are greater than 65. So hence the bimodal distribution. The buzzword here is sunburst. Once again, they won't describe it as sunburst. They'll just describe it in a different way. And then treatment is surgical and chemo. So in general for this one, it's essentially just memorization of the demographic and also memorization of the description of the keyword, which is onion skinning. So those two things, and then if you also know the treatment, which is actinomycin D, can really help clue you in that the answer is B. So I hope that helped, and thanks for watching.